Hello, welcome to the seminar devoted to indigenous psychologies. This seminar is probably the first event devoted to indigenous psychologies organized in the Czech Republic, even it's online. The organizer is Czech Moravian Psychological Society, and we will invite here three speakers today. The first speaker is Dr. Antonie Dvořáková. Dr. Dvořáková is a Czech scholar who is currently based in the UK. She studied psychology in the Czech Republic, but then she moved to the United States and got degrees in Indigenous Nation Studies and a PhD in comparative human development from University of Chicago. She conducts interdisciplinary research and brings together cultural psychology, indigenous studies, educational research, and qualitative methods. In her talk, she will introduce indigenous psychologies. So, Dr. Dvořáková, welcome. I will introduce also other two speakers. So, the second speaker is Professor Tetsuji Ito from Ibaraki University. Professor Ito got his doctoral degree from Nagoya University, and since then he works at Ibaraki University currently as a full professor. Professor Ito's research explores how collective memory, narrative, and local engagement shape community resilience and identity, particularly in post-disaster and river-based communities. His recent papers are about how residents recall, share, and visualize their experience with rivers and floods to strengthen community ties. His talk at our seminar will be about the power of the land. So welcome, Professor Ito. And the third speaker at this seminar is Professor Rogelia Pe-Pua. Professor Pe-Pua is a Filipino social psychologist who is very well known for her pioneering contributions to Sikolohiyang Pilipino, Filipino Psychology, which is the Filipino indigenous movement in psychology. Professor Pe-Pua also edited both handbooks of Filipino psychology, and she worked with Virgilio Enriquez, the founder of Filipino psychology from the very beginnings, from the beginning of 1970s, and was very instrumental in developing theoretical foundations and research methodologies of Filipino psychology. Professor Pe-Pua talk will introduce Filipino psychology to us. Professor Dvořáková, thank you for coming, and please start your talk.
So I prepared a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, please share the screen. Share your screen.
Oh, yeah, the sharing. Is it working now?
Yes, we can see it.
So I don't know if I'm actually introducing indigenous psychologies. I am more like thinking, I am introducing why we are talking about indigenous psychologies today, why it is so important. That it's not just because it's cool or such, but if we are psychologists and we do psychology, we want to get it right. So that's why we have to get involved with indigenous psychologies, because all psychologies are indigenous. So it's necessary to realize that and realize what the implications are. I would not even call myself an indigenous psychologist. So that's why I put someone else quote here about what indigenous psychologies may be, but we will learn more about that definitely from the next two speakers. My point is that what is known as psychological knowledge, or in the Czech Republic it's called obecná psychologie, or like general psychology, that's actually only one of indigenous psychological theories, which pertains to the what is called weird populations, because of the way the data was collected. I think everyone knows what I'm talking about the samples. They are mostly Western educated, industrialized, rich and democratic populations. So in these social cultural contexts, we can say what was found applies pretty well, but that excludes a lot of people even in Western countries, in the US as well, I can tell because I live there. And it's not just the indigenous populations, it's even just working class people are not very well represented in those theories of psychological knowledge. And that's why it doesn't apply quite to them either. So what is called psychological knowledge now, it claims to be universal, but its models are actually based in colonialism and racism. So in order to get psychology right, we have to look around, because why should just one of the indigenous psychologies, the weird one, be imposed elsewhere as if it was better, right? So I'm not the first one to say this. There has been, challenges to the status quo of psychological knowledge before. And people talk a lot about cultural psychology in this context. However, cultural psychology actually does not challenge the psychological knowledge and what it implies about being universal or not, because it still assumes universalism. And it still uses psychological knowledge theories, because that's what you're supposed to do to be scientific, right? And it still relies on those weird methodologies and methods. Maybe it collects data from different countries around the world. I have just participated in one which collected data from 63 nations, but it was mostly just surveys. So the methods used create artifacts which are again supporting the weird theorizing. So what I would say about me, I am more like cultural psychologist, because cultural psychology doesn't just compare nations and doesn't start from the psychological knowledge as we know it, but it highlights cultural grounding of human psychological characteristics. It's trying to understand the development and transformation of culture and ultimately make culture central to psychology in general. because cultural psychology says culture and psyche make each other up, so it's not possible to study one without the other. Although I am wondering if what I understand as cultural psychology and in what was called like cross-indigenous psychology, if it's kind of the same thing or if they could collaborate. Either way, it seems to me I'm getting discouraged because, you know, some articles about weird samples, they were published 15 years ago, and the book Decolonizing Methodologies, that was quarter a century ago, a big deal. We got all excited thinking, okay, now everything will change, but not much seems to have changed, even if cultural psychology has been around for a long time. So, oh, here, yeah, sorry, you know, I have to explain what is it that I am doing to see how it's similar. So, yeah, in cultural psychology, the point is how human behavior is embedded in and shapes historically based social-cultural, econopolitical environments. And it's also trying to relate to like lived experiences and consider culturally specific worldviews and practices, because human psyche and culture constitute each other. So as opposed to cultural psychology, as opposed to cross-cultural psychology, cultural psychology furthers conceptual understanding of ethno-racial and social culture diversity, and notably goes beyond treating culture as an external variable. I didn't look at the advertisement this year, but when I look at the advertisement of the cross-cultural psychology conference last year, it still says that it's a branch of psychology that seeks to understand how culture influences human behavior. So I think that's the biggest difference between cross-cultural psychology and cultural psychology as I understand it, because people often confuse them. But as a cultural psychologist, I would say there is no influence of culture. So is it shocking? No, there is no influence of culture. They make each other up. It's not just mere influence. So again, that's my point, that the so-called weird psychology, I don't think I have to elaborate because people know what we are talking about, right? What we call psychological knowledge, it applies in the context in which it was created, but it actually silences and decontextualizes the lived experiences of other populations. So that's why indigenous psychology is important. And that's why indigenous psychologies seem to be more appropriate, ethical, equitable, inclusive, pluralistic research practices, although this is what Seamus Power said about cultural psychology. And it's not just, to be culturally responsive or even politically correct. It's in order to get it right. If psychology wants to make any claims beyond the weird and colonized context, then it needs indigenous psychologists. Actually, this year, the APA, the American Psychological Association, figured it out as well. So they published this statement on reconciling traditional wisdom and psychological science, where they say that actually it's necessary to integrate traditional wisdom from around the world with the conduct of psychological science. in order to get it right, in order to get the discipline talk about human experience as opposed to just a little part of it. I'm sorry to say I didn't see how much longer I have. If it's showing somewhere here, I don't. Oh, I unfortunately don't know how to tell. So I was thinking, although I am now doing different projects, I was thinking I would talk a little bit about my research in the United States, where it would be, there are different definitions or different perspective on indigenous psychology. So this would be the psychology of the indigenous peoples, like the indigenous nations who are the original inhabitants there. It's the project which I did when I was at Stanford University and the University of Chicago. It was qualitative, of course. I used semi-structured, in-depth interviews to talk with 42 actually indigenous scholars at locations all over the United States, but I didn't include 2 of them for different reasons. And to make it a little bit interactive, I have a question now for everyone in the audience, wondering how many Native American or indigenous tribes there are who are federally recognized nowadays in the US. So can people give me some tips, some guesses, how many they think there are? Anyone brave enough to try? Well, if not, there are 574 federally recognized tribes, which means there are many more. Some are state recognized, some are fighting to be re-recognized after the government was trying to kind of get rid of their obligations and therefore it dispersed them. But my point is that all these have their own cultures which reflect the geographical locations and how their culture developed. So I am not going to talk about them as being like homogeneous. I have some specifications here concerning the participants, if people are interested. But my point is that because there is such a great diversity, I will be talking about what they had in common in spite of their diversity. But I'm not even talking about, you know, how the people are. It's more like I'm talking about how the differences observed relate to the historically based social cultural circumstances in which they are embedded. And actually, this is a project that was done with indigenous peoples who received their doctorates, and they are established scholars at the mainstream universities. So one could say, oh, these are already assimilated and, you know, integrated in the mainstream, but yet it seems that that's how it looks at first sight. But it is often suggested that the reason why indigenous people are actually increasingly underrepresented in higher education as opposed to ethnic minorities, which slowly, but the representation is growing, So indigenous peoples are actually increasing underrepresented. Often it is suggested that it's because of their culture, which kind of holds them back. So I asked them if it is the case, but it seems that it's not just tribal people or minorities who experience cultural mismatch. They said the worlds were actually totally different, like they are totally different worlds, that's what they said. But that doesn't mean culture would hold them back. The problem is rather that the academic culture normalizes what applies to the so-called weird populations, and it places other people at a disadvantage, kind of blaming the victim. However, it turned out one of the findings was that the difference is between ethnic minority perspective and indigenous nations perspective in the US was that while the minorities, their master narrative is about arbitrary exclusion, and they are trying for complete inclusion, which is the master narrative that facilitates the idea of assimilation. The indigenous tribes, they actually maintain their exclusion from the federal political system because they had treaties with the US as if it was any other nations having treaties with them. So their sovereignty is limited, of course, because they still live within the US, but they still build on the sovereignty. I mean, there have been a lot of policies like the boarding schools who destroyed a lot, but they still build their identities on distinct tribal affiliations, and that actually helps them because they see their work in academia as a tool which actually works towards better future for their tribes, or even if they think about their community as not only just their tribe, even if it's pan-Indian conceptualization, then they consider themselves serving as role models for future generations, that they deconstruct the negative Indian stereotypes, even if they are like in molecular biology or some discipline where they can't, like work towards, building their tribal college or such. It seems to them that just by being there, they are role models, or they show that anyone can do it. So they feel like they are giving back to their tribal community, which is crucial conceptualization within their tribal beliefs. So actually, that's how their culture actually helps them to deal with the different two worlds, because they perceive their work as a kind of social action on behalf of their people. And because they are orienting towards this higher purpose, it helps them to reinterpret the bad circumstances and the negative experiences into sources of resilience. So it doesn't seem like it should affect their identity, because they say academia is just a tool, it's not my identity. So family, community, and homeland, which is present for them, as opposed to some ethnic minorities who were brought by force to the US, it actually helps them to successfully negotiate and integrate the incongruent social cultural context. So this is just one example of finding which could be one of the indigenous psychologies, although in the US it's kind of more complicated, but that would be another presentation, or that will be the chapter in Rogelia's book. But I would just mention this last thing, which I also found out during the research, because it's a big deal talking about independence and interdependence, which is on the level of self, or individualism and collectivism on the level of social cultural context, that the tribal views, which seems to be similar for many tribes, and although I know best the Cheyenne, then they have cultural narratives which actually don't show the dichotomies which are typical for the weird social cultural context. It's more like the more the better. That's what they were saying in their interviews, that the more cultures you know about, the more tools you have, the more effective you can be. They're like a funny, from history, they're like funny incidents about that. Like, for example, when in the 19th century, the missionaries came to the Cheyenne, like each of the religions was trying to have people in their group, in their, gosh, I forgot how to say in English. Well, everyone was trying to have them follow their church, have them in their church. But the Cheyennes, they would go to, you know, the Protestant church and the Catholic church, and they would go to the Sundance as well. So they were saying, well, how can you do that? I mean, you have to choose. You have to do one church or another. And they said, well, if church is a good thing, right? Going to church, and yeah, the missionary said. So they will say, well, if going to one church is good, then going to more of them must be even better. Like they didn't see it as you have to choose. So this is an example how the tribal worldviews are helping to integrate incongruent social cultural contexts or conceptualizations, because they don't see it as a problem that they are different. They don't see that you have to choose one. And this is also kind of shown in that they don't have the dichotomy of independence or interdependence. It seems that there is more like this relational individuality concept shown in their experience, which allows for appreciation of uniqueness and self-improvement efforts without adhering to competitive individualism. They do, it is an experience of one's embeddedness in personal relationships and one's involvement within groups as a valuable member, but it's not because of conformity. It's more like because of making contribution. And it seems that they understand that if people are different, each of them has contribution which is even more valuable. Like historically, they would go for the vision quest, where each of them would acquire like a spirit which corresponded to a different animal with different characteristics. And therefore, their uniqueness would be even more valuable. They were not trying to be all the same. But I think now my time is up. So I just prepared this last slide showing my email. If anyone wants to know more, then please write to me. Did I run out of time, Václav?
Yes, but if you want to continue a few minutes, you can.
Well, I could talk, but I just okay. I have a few quotes from the research. How I was talking about academia being a tool for giving back. I didn't include them in the presentation because I was afraid it would be too long, but I will show you. You know, to so that you can see the authentic quotes, what they were saying, how it would their culture actually help them to succeed in academia, even though it's totally different than the academic culture. I think in the US with the indigenous tribes, there is more like indigenous psychology of the tribes because each of them is different. When it comes to the spiritual aspects of their beliefs and their worldviews, it doesn't make sense to try to make pan-Indian conclusions. So, well, it would be, if I get into it, it will be like really long. So I think the next speakers will be talking more about indigenous psychology, so it should not be me. But I was just showing that what I found out about the indigenous professors and scholars using academia as a tool, it actually corresponds to existential analysis. So in the weird context, it took them a lot of time, but they figured it out as well. It's the same idea that, like Frankl says, that the primary driving force of all humanity is desire to find a higher purpose, and that people really, fundamentally strive to for meaning in their life, which transfers their own needs and desires. So it's the same idea as the indigenous tribal worldviews, which emphasize spiritual quest for living a meaningful, balanced life, which is one of the things which, if all the indigenous psychologies got together and they were trying to see what is same for all humanity, this might be one of the things. And then actual, real psychological knowledge could be created from conceptualizations like this. And it seems to be helpful as well for well-being and for therapy, because this kind of orientation helps reinterpret and transform the negative experience of discrimination, disadvantage, which of course we need to fight for getting rid of it, but it's gonna take much more time. So in the meantime, this is one of the things which could help people. Thank you very much for your patience. Maybe that's enough as an introduction. Now we actually learn about indigenous psychologies.
Thank you for your introductory talk, Dr. Dvořáková. Does some from the audience have some question for Dr. Dvořáková about her presentation? So it seems no questions.
Dr. Pe-Pua.
Yes, please.
It's not a question, but just a comment that I'm very, very impressed with your research, Anthony. And I'm so happy to hear this research. And there is something about Filipino psychology, for example, which I consider a weakness. And the weakness is that we have not actually delved deeply into the indigenous people as a group in our society. So ours has been like a reactive indigenous psychology against the exogenous psychology.
Oh, yeah.
So we have developed indigenous psychology that is representative and very reflective of Filipinos, but there's a small group of Filipinos that have not really been fully integrated in indigenous psychology in the Philippines, and that is the indigenous people. And I'm very happy to hear you talk about this because it is an idea that I will bring to my colleagues in the Philippines to think about that how are they actually represented in our educational system and in our form of government, for example. So I just want to thank you for giving that inspiration.
Oh, yeah, thank you. That's because they are kind of like an indigenous nations within Philippines, like
Yes.
but they are
Yes.
now
Yeah.
minority.
Mm. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and if you start from their worldviews and
Yes.
practices, I wonder what you find out if it's the
Yeah.
same as the
Absolutely.
mainstream.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Dr. Serha also raises hand.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Ahoj, Vašku. First of all, thank you very much for interesting talk, Antonia. Finally, I get a chance to see you in person. Well, yeah, very, very interesting stuff. I have one, maybe two questions. I'm not very familiar with the state context, but I lived 1 year in Canada, in West Coast. And my first question is, although Canada is the first state which recognized the praxis of that residential schools as a kind of cultural genocide,
Yeah, the boarding
which
schools.
the boarding schools in 2018, I think, they still use the term or they talk about the natives as about the First Nation. However, that concept of nation is quite ethnocentric or more specifically Eurocentric, and it's quite recent concept from the 19th century. So I'm wondering if you come across to the topic with your participants, if they recognize themselves as a nations, or if it's not like still the very Eurocentric or ethnocentric label. And the
Yeah,
second is
okay.
I assume you conducted the interviews in English,
Yeah.
and whether you recognize the limits of English, because one of the major tenets of the indigenous approach is that again the dominance of English really biased our conclusions or the way how we transfer or interact, because basically some terms or core terms are non-transferable.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
about the non-transferable terms, that's what we discuss often in, I participate in Cheyenne language classes. They are online, like in Zoom, so I can participate from Europe too. And there we do discuss that often. However, it doesn't apply to the participants in my research because them teaching at mainstream universities, they speak very good English, and I'm sorry to say most of them don't speak their native languages anymore. Even on the Cheyenne reservation there, the people who actually can speak Cheyenne, the number is decreasing real fast. So I think argument about using indigenous languages, it's more pertains to, you know, Indonesia or China or, you know, like contexts where people actually do speak an indigenous language, all of them, which is unfortunately because of the boarding schools and all the assimilation policies, which the US government or even Canadian, although I don't really have much Canada experience, they were actively trying to dissolve and destroy that. So they succeeded to such an extent that unfortunately, you know, speaking in an indigenous language to indigenous peoples of the US, it's not as applicable. And so concerning the First Nations, that's the term which they use in Canada. And like I said, I don't have experience with people from Canada. But in the US, when I started my interviews, I asked them, who are you? Like, how would you describe yourself? So none of them said, I am a Native American or American Indian or any term like that, which they do use instead of First Nations in Canada. Each of them identified themselves by their tribe. Like some of them are more tribes, you know, because even there maybe 4 tribes, because their grandmother and grandfather on one side and the other, they could have been different tribes. And some would talk about one tribe in which they're enrolled, but they really build their identities even individually on the particular tribe. Like it is useful to use what they have in common in research like this, but personally that's not so meaningful for them. So whatever label whoever imposed, they use the tribal identifications. Also, not just for their personal identities, but it's more meaningful to talk about specific tribes, you know, the Crow, the Cheyenne, the Mohawk, than trying to use wider labels, which I don't know, maybe that's more applicable in Canada.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not the expert in that, but yeah, my experience from Canada is that like every single lecture which started at university started with acknowledgement that it takes place on the land which was seceded from the
But did they say the tribe which used to live there?
And the thing is that sometimes it's unpronounceable. That there's really complicated
yeah, that
transcript. So yeah,
but they
yeah,
didn't say just. They didn't just say it's First Nations land. They did use a specific tribal designation, right?
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, that is the thing. Yeah, that they
Yeah, well, they didn't
try
give
to implement this amic approach. Yeah.
Yeah. So they used the particular tribes there too. And the acknowledgements, it didn't, it's done in the US as well, but only like the last 10 years. They didn't do it like 10 years ago. So maybe that's a sign of a little bit of progress in a positive way. Although, well, if I start talking, I will take everyone's time.
Yeah.
So maybe I should.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Does someone have some other question for Dr. Dvořáková? If not, then I will introduce Professor Ito from Ibaraki University, who should have his talk now. Please, Professor Ito, if you can share your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening. Now it's time in Japan It is almost 6 p.m. Good evening for everyone, but the world is round, so maybe in Europe, good morning, right? So I'm very happy to be here and great honor to make a presentation for you. And just to, can I share my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Presentation. And start presentation mode. Can you see it?
Yes.
Is it okay? Okay, so just 2 years ago, I invited Dr. Rogelia Pe-Pua to Japan and Dr. Varkov Linkov also online to the association of the conference of the Japanese qualitative psychology that was held in Ritsumeikan University in Japan. And after that, we keep good connections. So today I'm here. But unfortunately, I must say sorry because I'm not a good English speaker. So maybe please, if you make a question to me, please talk to me very simply. Okay. Of course, I am not an English native speaker, and I am not. I have no experience to study in the English world, so it is a little bit difficult for me to understand sometimes. So please let me say sorry first. But this way, say sorry first is maybe a indigenous Japanese way in the presentation. Okay, so let me start. I have just 20 minutes. And my title is The Power of the Land, the core concept and meaning of indigenous in Japan. This is my self-introduction. My name is Ito Tetsuji. Ito is my surname, family name, and Tetsuji is my given name. But please call me Ito, but much better, much easy for you to remember. I am a professor of College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Ibaraki University, one of the middle-sized national university in Japan located north of Tokyo. A faculty member of Global and Local Environmental Co-Creation Institute at my university, that is so-called GREC. And I was born in 1964 in Nagoya City, in the center of Japan, when the first Olympic game was held. Graduate from College of Literature at Nagoya University. I major is in I major in social psychology. I had experience to live in Hanoi, the capital city of Vietnam, in 1998 to 1999, and I am still maintaining close relationship with it, being a visiting lecturer in Vietnam Japan University, VJU, that is located in Hanoi. And embark on the insightful exploration of indigenous psychology. My presentation is dive into the profound connections between culture, land, and identity with a special focus on Japan. So I want to focus on the Japanese indigenous concept first, okay? After that, I want to explain about the power of the land. This collection invites you to engage with the core of Japanese thought through its foundational indigenous concept. In Japanese, that is called dochaku gainen in Chinese letters. Each concept offers an interpretative framework for understanding the subtle structures of human relationship and enduring pursuit of social harmony that characterize Japanese culture. As already Dr. Anthony mentioned, amae is a very representative concept, maybe, I think so. And maybe you know that. That means emotional dependence. Of course, it is very difficult to translate into English. I can understand in Japanese well, but if I explain in English, the nuance of this word is, how can I say, it's very difficult to explain. But I try to do that. Dive into amae, a fundamental concept articulated by psychoanalyst Doi Takeo. It describes a profound, almost childlike desire to be passively loved and indulged, reflecting a deep-seated reliance on another's goodwill. This trust-based bond, most vividly seen in parent-child relationship, allowed individuals to anticipate care and understanding without the need to explicit requests, fostering a unique sense of belonging and emotional security. This is the amae, Japanese concept. And secondly, I want to show you the wa. That means maybe harmony in English. Beyond the mere concept, wa embodies Japanese profound ideal of collective harmony and cooperation. It subtly guides individuals to prioritize the group's stability and unity over personal desire, fostering environments where open conflict is gently sidestepped. This emphasis ensures the preservation of crucial social bond and maintains the fabric of community. That is wa. Okay. And thirdly, haji, that means shame. Haji means a strong feeling of shame, shaped by how others see us and by social expectations. In Japan, this sense of shame often guides people to protect their reputation and keep harmony with others. More than personal guilt, it serves as a quiet but powerful compass for behavior in society. Do you understand? And thirdly, in the fourth, I want to show you the ma. That means space or interval. More than just space and interval, ma embodies a profound, often invisible spaces and strategic poses that enrich Japanese culture. It's a silent rhythm in conversation and deliberate, sorry, my pronunciation is very bad, deliberate break in art or the thoughtful distance in relationships. These moments of quiet are not empty voids, but powerful communicative elements inviting deeper engagement and meaning. This core concept is representative of Japanese indigenous concept, I think. But of course, there is another concept, another word. But in this presentation, I want to limit these four concepts. And Japanese culture may be basically culture of relationality, 関係性の文化 in Japanese. These indigenous psychological ideas show how deeply Japan values relationships. Instead of focusing on individual independence, Japanese culture treasures the shared feeling, subtle connections, and mutual understanding that bind people together and shape its social values. And here, now I want to explain about explain the difference between dochaku and indigenous. In the word, the English word indigenous sometimes translated into Japanese, that is called dochaku. But dochaku and indigenous is different, I think. I want to explain, I try to explain it. Japanese dochaku, here you can see. Just a moment, I want to change the laser pointer. Dochaku, dochaku. The Japanese term dochaku in the sorry, to the we use together do. There is two Chinese letters. Do, that means soil, and chak, that means settle. The profound connection lies in do, that means soil, which directly links to tochi, land, or daichi, earth, embodying the deep meaning of being rooted in the very land itself. Do you understand? So Japanese word dochaku, that means rooted in the very land or earth itself. This word includes this meaning, okay? But in English, indigenous, the English word indigenous comes from the Latin indigena. I don't know the current correct pronunciation, indigena, which combines in, that means within, and gigunere, to give birth. It means birth within or native. But the idea of soil in Japanese, that is do, soil or physical land, is not directly part of its original meaning. So in Japanese, dochaku, that includes the land or earth or something like that. But in English, basically not directly related to that. That is a big difference, I think. This distinction likely shared across many European countries marks a fundamental difference from the dochaku in Japanese concept, dochaku concept in Japan. So I want to, my research colleagues and I are focusing on the power of the land. So every individual inherently connected to their land, a profound truth often overlooked by traditional psychological framework. In our modernized world, this fundamental link has been consistently downplayed or ignored. In Japan, our discourse on indigenous psychology deeply emphasizes the power of the land. So please understand this is one of the concepts of indigenous psychology. This perspective highlights the intrinsic connection to one's physical environment. However, the English term indigenous does not inherently carry this specific emphasis on land. This linguistic nuance suggests that exploring indigenous psychology and the power of the land through different culture and linguistic lenses could unveil entirely new facet of human experience and understanding. And this, from here, I want to show you some slide, and that was used in the round table conducted in the APA, American Psychological Association, in 2022. The title is Power of the Land and Indigenous Psychology in Japan. So this is the outline of the round table, and could you please read it? And this figure shows that the interaction between the local people and the land. Do you understand? Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic is almost over, but at the time, that is we are sharing that between the people and accumulation over many years to the land, and from the land there is a penetration and so on, and people are caring with each other, and the power of the land is located in the land, but it's very difficult to define it. So we try to discuss about it and try to catch it, but still not fulfilled. And this is an example. My grandmother, who are living in a local mountain area. This is my grandmother, and it's me, 61 years old, 61 years ago, sorry. My grandmother was born around 1910. It was a large family with 5 children, including my mother. This is my mother and my grandmother. But in the end, she lived alone in an inconvenient mountain house with no running water. She never tried to live there and live in a city with children. And for example, my mother and the other brothers and sisters get out the house and move to the city, Nagoya city, and live there. And the children wants to invite their mother, my grandmother, to the city, but my grandmother do not want to do that. At the end, she died in this house. Inconvenient, but maybe she could not leave the land. She was living in the land. Okay. And this is the second example, people living in a flood-prone area. In 2019, 6 years ago, typhoon number 19, that is so-called Hagibis, also attacked the area near Ibaraki University, my university, with large-scale flood, with a declining birth rate and aging population. Many young people are leaving this area, and there are elderly people who continue to cultivate field, and the abundant land is the power to grow delicious vegetable. So the population, especially the young generation, do not want to live here anymore, but many old elderly people continue to live there. So they also attached to the land. That is also our interesting. And my research colleagues and I sometimes have a discussion on the movies. We watch the movie together, and after that, discuss about the power of the land. That is described in the movie. For example, there is Suzara. This is a Vietnamese film, Nostalgia for Countryside, and Little Forest, that is created in Japan and Korea. So film is a very good content because there is many context and cultural context, and including many things that can be seen in our daily lives. So we can discuss about it, and after that we can understand somehow about the land that was the power of the land that was described in the film. So that is very simple, my presentation. Thank you for your kind attention. If you have any question, please ask me simply, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ito, for your talk. So maybe I will have a question. You mentioned, I made, you mentioned several Japanese concepts like wa, harmony, haji, shame, and ma, space. I don't remember I would ever have seen these concepts anywhere in English written literature in cultural psychology. Why these concepts are not mentioned by Japanese scholars writing in English?
I don't know why, but to tell the truth, ChatGPT selected these words.
Okay.
Yeah, I asked ChatGPT what is a key concept of Japanese indigenous one. So ChatGPT replied, selected these words, so I selected it.
Okay, so
As you
maybe
know,
there should be some.
Ama is very famous, right?
Yes.
Yes,
That's the
yeah.
top, I think. But wa, haji, ma is not so popular for you, I believe.
Yes.
But now you have a chance to know that.
Yeah. I will try to look for some literature in Japanese. Fortunately, like with the current automatic translation, yeah, the article in any language could be translated to be understandable. So I think this is something maybe I missed when I looked for some Japanese indigenous concepts which I don't know. So thank you for telling us about this.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Professor Pe-Pua?
Well, I just want to say that Professor Ito, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. And I now have more faith in ChatGPT, but the fact that you agreed to it and presented it, I'm more confident. And coming from a Japanese psychologist, I am more confident that these are concepts that are important for you. And when I was listening to you, I cannot help but think that I thought you were speaking about Filipino psychology or even Chinese psychology, because there is so much similarity in what you said are the values of Japanese. So that makes me feel quite happy to be so familiar with the concepts that you mentioned. Now, the second thing I want to say is that I appreciate very much your pointing out the difference between Tochaku and Dochaku and Indigenous. Yes. Yeah, I appreciate that very much because now I understand why when I was there in Japan doing research on indigenous psychology, the psychologists always telling me we don't have an indigenous psychology. We don't have an indigenous psychology, they said. And they said, we have not been colonized just like the Philippines was. That's why we don't have that experience of needing to decolonize. And then I later found out that they just say Japanese psychology, and that's it. And that, to me, I interpret that as their what indigenous Japanese psychology is. And among that is a mic. So I just want to mention and congratulate you on a very interesting presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Wonderful comments. I'm very glad.
Yeah, if I can also comment, it is a very big deal to build their identity on the connection to land for the indigenous peoples in the United States as well. Even when I ask them who you are, for example, one lady would talk about, if she thinks about herself, she has this image of the red land in Oklahoma. She said her husband makes fun of her. She said, you should put some in the jar and keep it here on the shelf. You can't quit talking about the red land. So yeah, that may be one of the things that would be common for different indigenous psychologies, the connection to the land as well. Or for the Cheyenne, they even have this event in their history that they were removed from the land where they used to live in Montana, and they actually ran back like 1,000 kilometers when the winter was starting. And in the end, you know, the men, they said, no, we won't give up. And they divided. But most of the men and women, they said, you know, the winter is here. We are going to die. So let's give up. And so they went to the fort and they said, okay, here we are. You know, they actually ran for 1,000 kilometers with the whole U.S. cavalry chasing after them, and they couldn't get them. In the end, they gave up, and they thought they would be, you know, left to stay in Montana, which they almost got there. But at the fort, they told them, okay, tomorrow you pack up and you go back south where you were. So they said they wouldn't. They said they wouldn't go back. So they didn't give them any heat, any food, nothing. So they were going to die there in the barracks. So in the end, they broke out, trying to run from an enclosed fort, those. So this resulted in so-called Fort Robinson massacre. Most of them were killed there. But as a result of this, when everyone learned about it, the president issued an executive order by which the Northern Cheyenne Reservation was created in Montana. So as a result of this dramatic outbreak and massacre, they actually did get to return and stay in Montana. So I'm just mentioning it because that's how big deal it is for them to be in their land.
Yes, thank you very much for your additional comment, additional information. Of course, the power of the land is not limited to the Japanese people, but maybe basically all people, all human beings are living in on the land, I believe. So we must think about it. Thank you very much.
A lot of mainstream Americans, they move around a lot and they don't see it such a big deal. Like if you ask the average weird population member, where are you from? They go like, the last 3 years I lived in California, before I lived in Oregon, and actually my parents come from Vermont and I was born in Oklahoma. But they don't tell you like, I come from Moravský Písek in the Czech Republic, you know. So maybe it's not, well, there is variation, like everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I see that the discussion has stopped. So now is the Thank you, Professor Ito, for your talk. And please stop
Thank you very
sharing your
much.
presentation. And now is the time for Professor Rogelia Pe-Pua to introduce us Filipino psychology. Please, Professor Pe-Pua, it's your time.
Thank you much. Thank you very much for having me this afternoon. I have a tendency to over-prepare, but I also talk fast, so it's okay. Yeah, so I want to talk about my topic is about let me just screen share that. Okay. My topic is about Filipino psychology, how it began and what it has achieved. And I have been involved in the Filipino psychology movement for about 50 years now. And you will see where the 50 years come from. When we talk about Filipino psychology, I always want to say that it actually started even before, way before the psychology was introduced as a discipline in the Philippines. It began with the Babaylans, or the indigenous priestesses and healers, who were the first psychologists who will treat people for their mental health problem, or even with some behavioral problems, not only physical illnesses, but psychological as well. Now, we also have a history of being colonized by Spain and also by America. The reason why I say here more than 300 years in the convent is because the Spaniards left very much a strong legacy of the religion, so that about 80% of Filipinos are Catholic, and it has very much permeated our way of life. And when I say 50 years in Hollywood, it's because of the influence of the American, which pretty much dominated the culture or our ways of life in terms of what we like, in terms of movies, what we eat, and the way of thinking. In fact, also the language, because language became the English. English became the medium of instruction in our educational system. Now, Western psychology arrived around the 1920s or 1925, with psychologists being brought in by Americans. And this was followed by many of our first psychologists being trained in America and coming back even stronger in terms of teaching Western psychology. Now, we have what we call the first quarter storm. So this is the first few years of the 1970s, and it was a period of the dictatorship of the late President Ferdinand Marcos. And he declared martial law and became very suppressive. He took out all the money in the Philippines. Philippines used to be the Asian what do you call dragon in terms of wealth, and because it's very much endowed with natural resources. But because of Marcos, we became a poor nation, and there was a lot of protests at the early part of the 1970s, and I remember this very clearly because my sister, who was teaching, who came from the University of the Philippines, was incarcerated because of being involved in protests against the government, and I was just starting my college years at the University of the Philippines, and I remember I would pass by what we call the Camp Crame to visit my sister, and then later my mother, because of they were imprisoned for their political views. So at around this time also, the Filipino psychology movement started. And it started with the arrival back of Virgilio Enriquez, who did a PhD in social psychology from Northwestern University. And even when he was there, he was hearing about all these protests, patriotic and nationalistic activities, and he wanted very much to start teaching in Filipino language and teaching about Filipinos. So when he came back, he did an early research on the historical and cultural roots of Philippine psychology, and it led him to identify indigenous concepts and approaches. He also developed a creativity and inventiveness project, and eventually he came up with a indigenous measure of character and personality called Panukat na Ugali at Pagkatao. Now, in 1971, he set up the Philippine Psychology Research House. This is him, and this is me, and this is me. So I started working for him when I was still an undergraduate. In 1975, we held the first national conference on Filipino psychology. And remember, 1975. Today, now, it's the 50 years of Sikolohiyang Pilipino, and we are celebrating it with a conference as well, which is run every year, and some kind of other events. Now, in this particular conference, Sikolohiyang Pilipino was defined. This is a translation in English. Psychology born out of the experience, thought, and orientation of the Filipino. The most important word here is orientation. So it is very much a delinking from Western psychology, although the actual delinking is not a total giving up of whatever is Western, but it is against an inappropriate or indiscriminate use or import of Western knowledge. Now, in December of the same year, we established the Pambansang Samahan sa Sikolohiyang Pilipino, or National Association of Filipino Psychology. So again, as you see, it's 1975, 50 years ago. Oh, it's not moving. Now, I have volunteered to talk about the achievements of Sikolohiyang Pilipino, and I could see it in terms of at least 4 areas: redefining psychology, articulating what SP or Sikolohiyang Pilipino looks like, identifying indigenous psychological concepts and theories, and the development of indigenous research methods. In terms of redefining psychology, Sikolohiyang Pilipino has defined for us what is really important to study as psychologists. And this includes, from our point of view, we need to talk about emotions and experience knowledge. We need to talk about the awareness of one's surroundings. Yes, we talk about information and understanding, not just behaviors, but also habits. And we need to talk about the soul, which is the way to learning about people's conscience. So Filipino psychology has also expanded the area or relationship with other disciplines. Enriquez himself said that Filipino psychology is too important to be left to the psychologists alone. So we had people from the arts, people from anthropology, sociology, political science contributing to the enrichment of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Now, in terms of identifying or clarifying what Sikolohiyang Pilipino is, we came up, a historian came up with the 4 filiations of SP. And these are the academic scientific psychology, academic philosophical psychology, ethnic psychology, and psychomedical system. In other words, SP is associated or can be, these 4 can be the sources of knowledge in Sikolohiyang Pilipino. And Enriquez also later came up, summarized what are the major characteristics of SP. So the principal emphasis in psychology, he said, is on identity and national consciousness, social awareness and involvement, psychology of language and culture, applications and basis in health practices, agriculture, art, mass media, religion, and so on. And he said that the principal methods of investigation is cross-indigenous, multi-method, multi-language, appropriate field methods, and total approach or triangulation. In terms of areas of protest, SP is against a psychology that perpetuates the colonial status of the Filipino mind. In terms of psychological practice, SP is on conceptualization in a Philippine context. In terms of science humanism issue, SP is concerned with both. In terms of mentalism behaviorism, SP admits both, but lesser emphasis on individual experience and greater emphasis on collective experience. On the analysis wholeness issue, it's not a big issue in SP. In terms of relation to universal psychology, SP is actually a step towards the development of a truly universal psychology. And it also characterizes SP as a liberated and interdisciplinary psychology. Now, this is a diagram to show the indigenization that we have experienced. So on the right-hand side, this has been the more popular way of indigenization, where it starts with the exogenous, and we try to indigenize the concept, we try to content, we try to modify text, and we try to translate imported materials. And then it goes up to theoretic indigenization as strategy, and culture assimilation or indigenous version of imported system. And on the other side, on the left-hand side, is what we actually favor and which turned out to be the more productive pathway of indigenization. And this is indigenization from within, where the basis is the indigenous. So we identify key indigenous concepts, methods, and theories. We make some semantic elaboration. We codify it indigenously or recodify, systematization or explication of implied theoretical frameworks, and then frame application or use. Now, in this sense, we prefer to call this indigenization cultural revalidation, because how can you actually, how can you indigenize something that is already indigenous? Okay, so you culturally revalidate it. Okay, now I will show you only two of the theories that we have discovered. And the very first one is Pe-Pua, which in the end becomes the hallmark of Filipino psychology. So sometimes we call it Pe-Pua psychology. So Pe-Pua is the shared identity, the unity of self and others, an inner self shared with others, or plainly speaking, fellow human being. Yes, we do have a concept of I, or self. But when you emphasize the I or self, then it is not culturally appropriate. So for example, when I finished my bachelor's degree and I finished with honors, and people will compliment me about it, what I said was, it's not me, or I did not do it for myself, but I did it for my mom. And it's always because of him that I reached this success. Now, from the elaboration of Pe-Pua, we do make distinction between outsider and insider, or one of us. Yes, but both outsider and one of us are considered Pe-Pua and have to be treated as fellow human being. Now here, analyzing the different levels based on Pe-Pua helped us in terms of understanding how we proceed in terms of our research. So for example, in the outsider, we as researcher can be treated by our participants in one of these ways. Either they just try to transact, or they try to be civil, or they just interact with us, or they participate, or they just conform with what we want. But here we are saying that if this is how you are treated by your participants, you cannot be guaranteed that your research data are valid, because they're just going along with you. They're being nice. But if you have rapport or mutual trust, then this is the minimum level that you can see that you can be, their data can be trusted. And the higher level is getting involved with their lives or being one with, okay? So the same in daily interaction, we see that this categorization is happening. Now, this is a big implication because in the past, when the American psychologists come to study us, and they say that our psychology is made up of hiya, which is shame, or utang na loob, which is debt of gratitude, and pakikisama, which is smooth interpersonal relationship. That is their interpretation. They're saying that these are the reasons why you did not, you are not progressing in your life, okay? But with the looking of Sikolohiyang Pilipino, we started to analyze or examine these values very carefully, and we realized that it's because they don't know our language that they were misled, and they thought these were actually negative values. But in reality, hiya is propriety or dignity, utang na loob is gratitude or solidarity, and pakikisama is companionship or esteem. So these are three big examples, and it turned out that it is a colonial value. They want us to believe that we are like that because it serves their purpose for us to kowtow to American way of thinking or American psychology. But anyway, I just want to point out that in the re-examination, using an SP perspective, we identified Kapwa as the core value, okay? So I will leave Kapwa behind and talk about the second indigenous concept. If you notice here, the word loob comes up a lot of time. Sama or lakas ng loob means resentment. Kagandahang loob means shared humanity. And mabuting loob is actually, kagandahang loob. So anyway, what I want to show is that loob is actually a very important indigenous concept. In literally, it means inside, interior, or inner part, which shows that to the Filipino psychology, what you have inside is very important. So in 2018, I mapped the loob and found out that it can have different meanings depending on what you attach to it, okay? And it can also have meanings depending on the binary. So whether it is a strong loob or a weak loob, a heavy loob or a light loob, a good or a bad loob, a soft or a hard loob. So it makes a lot of sense to theorize this and think about this as part of our indigenous concepts. And believe it or not, I'm sure you will not find this in Western psychology, but I'm also sure you will find this in other indigenous psychologies. Okay? So now let me go back to the third achievement in terms of research methods. Now this is Carmen Santiago. This is her when she was young, and this is her now. Now, Carmen Santiago was a graduate student of Enriquez. So Enriquez said, I want the class to do a research on an indigenous concept using indigenous methods. In any case, Carmen Santiago wanted to study pagkalalaki, a word which means male or man or manhood and so on. So she read all the literature and she could not find any that is relevant to Filipino manhood. So she just went to the village and did a study with only one question, no literature review, with only one question, what is pagkalalaki? And he found out, and she described her method as pakapakapa, which means groping, which means speculating. And it is later, another person defined it clearly as a supposition-less approach to social scientific investigation characterized by searching and probing into an unsystematized mass of social data in order to obtain order, meaning, and what did I say there? Can't see it clearly. And direction in research, okay? So I won't tell you the result of her research, but from that aspect of paka-paka-pa, Filipino psychologists became more confident to, or more inspired to go out there and find out what is the best way to do research. So the method that she actually used is pagtatanong-tanong. And you know what? She discovered that you cannot interview the Filipino farmers one-on-one. You cannot have individual interview. It has to be in group because culturally, she, a woman, will be frowned upon if she insists on interviewing the men one-on-one. Okay? So pagtatanong-tanong, these are some of the methods that developed later on, which we knew were effective, and we wrote about them, and we used them, and kept on refining them. So in terms of conversation-related methods, we have the pagtatanong-tanong, the improvised, informal, unstructured interview. We have the storytelling. We have the collective indigenous discussion, and we have the workshop method. In terms of indigenous approach to participant observation, we discovered the method of immersion and detachment, frequent visits, going along, or superficial participant observation, residing in the research site. So these are some of the methods that we discovered. And also in identifying these methods, we also came up with what we believe should be guiding principles when conducting indigenous research, in such a way that we believe that we should always be respectful of our participants. And most importantly, because we treat them as kapwa, we actually involve them in the management of the research in terms of time, in terms of how long it takes, in terms of them being allowed or being encouraged to ask us questions even before we ask the first question. So the equality is there and so on. Now, in terms of teaching, we encountered the difficulty of not having enough materials. And when I taught this Filipino psychology at the university, I decided to involve my students to type materials, and then we actually had it published by the University of the Philippines Press. And this is a picture of my students during the book launching. And this is an undergraduate class. We were able to publish the very first compilation of materials on Filipino psychology. This was followed by other materials because we believe that having them out published is so important to increase the scholarship in the area. And the latest were 2 handbooks on Filipino psychology, each volume containing 50 key articles. And this is my way of proving that Sikolohiyang Pilipino is viable, is sustainable, and it is providing leadership for other countries as well. So just quickly, without letting you read this, I just want to show that the first volume has a section on the foundation of Filipino psychology, a section on the history of Filipino psychology, a section on indigenous concepts, a section on the foundation of indigenous research, and a section on observation-related methods as well as conversation-related methods. Now, the second volume has is in terms of the use or application. So the application on personality or personhood, application on health and mental health, and application on social arts and community psychology. And the coming soon in the early part of next year is a compilation of 50 articles written by Virgilio Enriquez. And I think that this is very important because he has such an influence and he has a lot to say, not just about Filipino psychology, but about indigenous psychology in general. I will just end with 2 slides that I think will capture what we have in going with us. Now, this is a diagram of what was the impetus for us developing indigenous psychology. We felt that there is a uninational dominance in psychology, and this is Euro-US psychology, where what we're seeing is a dominant source culture of psychology of source culture, and then imposing it on target cultures, and then they call it cross-cultural psychology. Okay, so this cross-cultural psychology is then filtered out to the different countries. So here, cultures are treated as recipients, and third world countries are usually recipients. Now, what we want is cross-indigenous perspective, where we start with indigenous cultures, indigenous psychologies, and then we compare towards coming up with cross-indigenous knowledge, okay? Even the word global psychology, I'm still a bit uncertain whether that is really what we are aiming at, because I'm worried that if global psychology is just a combination of different data, then just because it's now global, but if it is not indigenous, based on indigenous perspective, then I'm not too sure that is what we want. So that is my last slide. Let me end with that eventually we are aiming at global psychology but through a cross-indigenous perspective. Thank you.
Thank you for your talk, Professor Pe-Pua. Does someone have a question for Professor Pe-Pua?
I was wondering if it would be somehow possible to combine indigenous and global to come up with a good name for the psychology you're trying to do. Because, yeah, global, it kind of sounds like globalized. So I would be also...
It will come.
You're working on it, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
working on it.
I would be very much interested in learning about developments concerning what you call cross-indigenous psychology, if I understood correctly, that it's kind of like the conceptualization derived from different indigenous psychologies, which they have in common.
Yes, I have done a little bit of this when I tried to compare the concept of Pe-Pua with the Chinese concepts of relationality, and also with Japanese. And I also looked at the cross-indigenization in terms of reciprocity, and also one other aspect. And currently, I'm teaching a graduate course on indigenous psychologies at the University of the Philippines. And their major assessment is to actually do a cross-indigenization. So they are in a process of picking a concept and seeing the different similarities and differences in other cultures. So I have been exposing that to them. And it's actually a whole lecture in itself that I gave. So I'm happy to send the the slides to you and some materials that actually showed how cross-indigenization can actually be done.
Please do. You have my email, right?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
I can send it to you too, Václav, and if you're
Yes,
happy
I
to
will be
send
very
it
happy.
to the members of the
Yes.
attending the seminar, so that because I was pretty challenged. Virgilio Enriquez passed away in 1994 when there was no attempt yet or initial work on cross-indigenization. And I was so curious about that, and I wanted to prove that it can work. So I did my own cross-indigenization, not the full one, and I had it published so that we have something out there that says that it is something that can be done. Global psychology, I'm still not too happy with that, but so far the discourse has been like that indigenous psychologists move towards global psychology. But hang in there. I'm writing a textbook on indigenous psychology to be published by Routledge, and that is one of the sections that I will have to dwell on and canvass the different meanings of global psychology and whether that is really where we are heading for.
Yeah.
So coming soon.
Looking forward to it.